we go live, and I think it has. Right, okay, so this morning, slightly earlier than I'm used to, but it's not too bad for the UK. I'm with Joseph Sullivan, someone who's on the other side of the Atlantic. How are you this morning, Joe?
I'm doing well. Been awake for a couple hours.
Fantastic. An early bird, huh? Well, the early bird does get the worm, so there's nothing wrong with that. I like to be up early myself. I was swimming yesterday morning. I'm still feeling it a bit today, actually. I'm a little bit.
I watched your cast yesterday.
Thank you. I'm more of a runner than a swimmer. I think definitely you can definitely tell if you were to watch me in the pool. But no, it was nice to sort of do a bit of exercise. Anyway, we're gonna have a little bit of a conversation about politics. We're both coming at things from a sort of interesting perspective, but hopefully it should be interesting to hear our views and have a bit of a discussion about the world of MAGA and the so-called woke elements, and so I suppose the way that America is and such would be a large theme of a lot of this. So I'll let you start, Joe. I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into things. Where would you say you're coming at this from?
Well, I'm kind of the left and the right tend to want to put us in the middle, and that's not at all where I'm coming from. On a recent podcast, I explained that a little bit. We've got the left over here and the right over here, and then they want to put us here, but really we're kind of back here and up here, looking at everything from the outside. And the MAGA versus woke situation, I think it does more harm to both parties than both parties realize. So that's kind of my perspective. I think that there's too much following going on and not enough independent thinking.
Okay, it's an interesting perspective. I think there's definitely there's definitely a frustration with labels. I think there's definitely a lot of people outside maybe the most animated elements of politics definitely get a little bit frustrated with how intense a lot of the Democrat versus Republican, so-called left, so-called right, like all the sort of terminology can be a lot of frustration for people who perhaps just want to get on with their lives and would rather not think about a lot of the political stuff. I suppose where I would disagree is that I do think there is a purpose and significance to a lot of the terminology. I think that whilst it is misapplied a lot, and I do think it is sensationalized, certainly in coverage of politics, I think that when you cut through that, there is something to be said about the term left wing and right wing and sort of how they are correctly applied and such. But on MAGA and woke, I think those two terms I think do have a interesting definition or interesting sort of place in our society at the moment, and I think it'd be interesting to talk about sort of how we understand the meanings of the two. So I'll let you pick which one would you like to start with, MAGA or woke? Where should we begin this conversation?
I pretty much hold both of them in disdain. I voted for Trump mostly because I could not vote for Harris. But the MAGA right, if you disagree with our president on any topic, you are suddenly ostracized from that movement. I never claimed to be MAGA. I wanted some things changed, and he gave good lip service to it. And I did the thing that I swore I'd never do, which was vote for the lesser of two evils. And the idea that Trump has now started a war, this being one of the major promises that got me in his camp initially, it's beyond unfathomable to me that people will just follow him straight to this wartime situation. So this is my co-host. This is Baggy. Sorry about that. I'm not in my
never have to apologize for a cat. Never have to apologize for him.
But the idea that MAGA is kind of, in my mind, on the extreme right, the opposite of woke is on the extreme left. And it's something that's very, very disturbing to me where the country's going on both sides.
Okay. So a few things. We'll touch on woke, I think, a little bit later, because I would offer perhaps a different perspective to what you've just said there. But on MAGA and Trump and such, you're absolutely right that they're in the Republican Party, in right-wing sort of conservative spaces, there is sort of distinction of sorts between run-of-the-mill conservative people with right-wing views and such, and then those steps to the far right, where you've got MAGA, the sort of ultra-nationalist side, the, as you've just said, fascistic, total adherence to Trump and the movement of seizing power that has led to really disastrous decisions been made so far, not just in this administration, but anywhere that MAGA has sort of taken hold, right? Like you've got the censorship, the destruction of educational principles, defunding, the selling of protected environmental lands for like pipelines and such, like loads of really abhorrent things, attacks on different marginalized groups, ICE raids, all of that stuff. And I think, whilst I would ask, would you say that you regret voting for Trump now? Like, do you feel?
I do actually regret voting for Trump, and not for a lot of the reasons that you listed, but primarily because he took us to war. And I think that affects not only, obviously, the global economy has been affected by the oil prices, but the idea that he has now gone 100% against the War Powers Act, and the ability for the MAGA camp to just ignore that, and for the left and the right to just ignore that. It's been 60 days. The War Powers Act says after 60 days, if the president is not able to prove to Congress that we need to be at war, he needs to start withdrawing troops. He's not doing that. So as far as I'm concerned, the president is in violation of the War Powers Act, which is a law that Congress passed.
Yeah. Do you think, though, that... So go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good, go ahead.
I was going to say that, do you think that this sort of was on the cards, right? Because for as much as Trump said lots of things in his election campaign and says lots of things to this day, right? Like you can very easily sort of find the contradictions between his social media feed, his rambling, awful press conferences, and the actual actions of the Trump administration, right? But this has always been sort of on the cards, and I think one of the reasons I think to tie it into our theme of why MAGA, I think, is the obvious thing to focus on the sort of MAGA woke dichotomy, and the woke one's a bit of a almost misleading threat, is because whilst one is, I suppose we could just sort of very briefly touch on like the history of the word woke and such. It's like it was originally in African American spaces, to describe being awake to racial injustice, right? It came from like the 30s, 40s, 50s. The idea that when you're thinking about the things that are hard in your life, rather than sort of turning it all inward and saying, I'm doing something wrong, there's an element of critique for society, because the people who are black and existing in a country with segregation and a history of white supremacy would have a lot of racism in that society that would be in the everyday lives of people in it. Hence, you'd be awake or woke to the injustice. And then obviously that was sort of repopularized or sort of maintained and gained a bigger audience in the modern era, right? 21st century, when social media, you've got people talking about police brutality and other sort of forms of injustice. They're saying, oh yes, we're woke, we're awake to the problem. Yeah, we can see what's going on. And then because it sort of became a bit of a buzzword, it became sort of something that was quick to signal to things like, and that's not to say it was a bad term, but it became something that, like a sort of a random liberal person on social media might say, oh yes, this is woke, I'm woke and such. It then got co-opted by people on the right and the far right and became like a term just to throw at anything, right? Like, oh, this is what, like it uses a pejorative. And we get to sort of now where it's almost just a baseless term because it's thrown around ironically and unironically, just at random for anything, used by people in the administration to say, oh, well, it's actually woke to have therapy classes at school, or it's woke to fly a pride flag on a building, and all sorts of just things they want to get rid of anyway and throw a label onto to try and critique it. And so rewinding, and I know I'm speaking a little bit long here, rewinding back to what we said about MAGA, the reason I think it's a little bit flawed to almost set up the conversation, to set up the perspective as always wrong on both sides, is because one of the sides is the Trump side, right, that has as you've just said, actively ignoring laws, actively taking apart the country's institutions and purported values, and is really negatively affecting the lives of not just Americans but people across the world, right? Because if you live in one of the countries that's getting drone strikes and such, you're not having a nice time. Not to mention all the other horrific things we can get onto. But yeah, that's my sort of perspective a little bit on some of that.
So I believe that the woke term wasn't only co-opted by the right to put all those things in it, but it was also kind of co-opted by the left to put all those things in it. If you go into any of these chat groups on Reddit or on Facebook, wherever, you'll find out that I've never followed the ideology of white supremacy. It just wasn't in my family. It wasn't how I was raised. I was raised in Augusta, Georgia area, and this is probably one of the most integrated areas in the country. But the idea that woke is only pertaining to that situation now is also done by the left to say this is an all-encompassing word. It's not just the right that's saying all these things belong in there. I believe the left is saying that as well. And they embrace all of the things that you listed outside of wokeness within that. As for how I look at the term woke, it's just a shortcut, just like MAGA. I don't think that most of the MAGA constituents are bad people. I think they wanted the influx of illegal immigrants to stop coming across the border. And like me, Trump gave good lip service to no new wars. And he came to the Libertarian Party, and he talked to us, and he told us what he had in mind. And it was a little bit catering to us. And I understand that, he has a history of saying things like Iran can never have nuclear weapons. But every politician, if you go down their history of statements, you're going to find all of these contradicting statements. I recently watched a Clinton video where he was talking about the out of control illegal immigration, and Biden was doing the same thing. The politics on the left and the right are both out of control, and all they're doing now is playing party politics. All they're doing is trying to get their constituents to be more cemented in their own belief system and ignore everything else around them. So when I say woke, I'm not just talking about the racist themes. I'm talking about all of that on the far, far left.
Okay. So I think there's, again, a few things to say there. So you're absolutely right. Biden, Clinton, Obama, plenty of politicians have said, made commentary on immigration. They've all sort of said similar things. But I think that whilst they are to the left of the Republican Party, these politicians still subscribe, firstly, to a neoliberal, capitalistic, free market sort of set of principles. And whilst there is obviously deviation in that they're more willing to have social programs, and they're more willing to engage with things we might consider sort of state-funded policies and such, they are still adherent to a sort of world set of economic principles that see free trade and free market policies and the private sector being a large part of things, right? So that's still right wing, just within the perspective of just American politics. It is to the left of the GOP. Secondly, I think that whilst it's true again that there's lots of things to critique these people on, there is a bit of a difference between sort of run-of-the-mill neoliberal Democrat politicians versus the fascism of what we're seeing in Trump right now. I think that's one of the reasons that whilst you're right that sort of signaling to nationalistic overtures is nothing new, MAGA clearly takes that, or the Trump movement takes that further. And I think the reason MAGA sort of sticks out is because it encapsulates, as a shorthand, like you said, a lot of the increased radicalization and far right sort of themes, and linking back to when they say making America great again, the adverb again is that overture to the previous times we referred to, right? The the Jim Crow era, the segregation era, the fact that they so openly embrace violence against not just so-called illegal immigrants, and it's a bit of a nebulous sort of term anyway, I find, but anyone that doesn't fit that sort of white nationalist construction of what America is. You see where they are sending ICE, and it's any urban area with lots of non-white people, because they don't discriminate based on actual sort of laws. They just want to get rid of people that they feel aren't American, appealing to that sort of racial supremacist order. And so I think then to tie that into what you were saying about sort of the both sides element of it, I don't see how there can really be a comparison between, like, I've been called woke before, right? Like, oh yes, you're woke, Owen. But I look at my views and I see no equivalence to the stuff that the far right and the Trump administration are doing right now. And so I find, whilst we absolutely can go into sort of what what you would sort of see the problem with like woke and the so-called left and stuff is, I see for me pragmatically, even if we sort of accept there's a dichotomy, the clear focus should be on MAGA, who right now, as you've just said, are tearing up law, no more wars, and then here we are, right? So I think that would be my perspective there.
Well, we have three branches of government. We have the judicial, the legislative, and executive. And the executive, as we both agree right now, is out of control. I personally think he's mostly out of control in Iran. As far as ICE goes, they have a job to do. I don't know how else they're going to do it.
Is that job a good one, though, would you say?
Is ICE's job a good one?
Yeah, like, would you say it's one that, I mean, if you look at what's happening, right, where they're just sort of showing up in massive SUVs, smashing up town centres, grabbing people indiscriminately. You look at, like, the abuses they've sort of done are widely reported, not to mention the death toll as well, right? Like,
well, the death toll is not really all that high. I believe that under the Obama administration it was actually higher from ICE. But the idea that we have to restrict ICE from doing their job in totality, I think that's a bad move. I think we have laws for a reason. We're a nation of laws, and when you come into the nation illegally, then there are consequences for that. And
but like, even if we accept the premise that, like, because I think it's easier. I mean, I still would reject it, but it's easier to imagine this sort of situation playing out where the illegal immigrant is someone that is some criminal that's stuck across the border and there's some menace to society that needs to be removed. But in reality, most of the people that are being targeted, like, or even the ones that are supposedly undocumented or illegal, like, they don't, their visa has expired, or they've had some change in regulatory status that means that they were previously had rights to be in the country but then lose them. And we're seeing this play out because ICE are actively conducting their raids at courtrooms and citizenship hearings and such, like people trying to actually follow these sort of Byzantine and often quite nebulous procedures and then just getting captured anyway. But more importantly, even if they were supposedly here without the consent of the American state, which not exactly like the be all and end all of justice and rights and such, right? It still wouldn't be right, I think, to spend billions on this, on really just unnecessary force, at the same time as the administration cuts the budget to schools or says no, we're not going to pay any park rangers because we're selling off the land to corporation XYZ to put a pipeline through it. Like, I think that we can. I think if we really think about what ICE represent, it's an organization that's basically extrajudicial and operating out of hand, same way that Trump is, because that is sort of the core criticism of MAGA, right? Like, it's not about a functioning society, it's a nationalist far right movement that is essentially tearing up whatever it wants to try and force its vision of the world onto society.
Well, when you say that they're not criminals, that they've come in, when they come in illegally, they're breaking the law and they're here illegally. So at that point, as far as the people whose visas are expiring, there's an expiration date on the visa. So they know that's coming. As far as them meeting the going into courts and waiting for those people to come out of that situation, if the courts cooperated with ICE, this would all go much more smoothly. The problem here isn't that ICE is enforcing the law. The problem is that the law wasn't enforced during the last administration, and we had so many illegal aliens come across the border.
That isn't quite accurate though, because I mean, firstly, it's not as though the Biden administration wasn't also funding ICE and also allowing these things to happen. Secondly, I think that it's not the measure of a functioning society to spend these billions on chasing people who weren't even doing it. I mean, that's another sort of thing as well, right? Like Gleep says in the chat, there's no threat explicit in a human who simply moved geographically from one location to another across an arbitrary line, right? And ultimately, these people who have come to America are firstly doing so through economic pull factors. You know, America's a much wealthier nation than other nations. They want to perhaps better their own chances in life because of the conditions of the global economy being quite weighted in favor of Western nations. Secondly, they contribute massively to the American economy, often incentivized to come across by American policies. I mean, you only have to look at lots of your own state, right? And many states in the South, agriculture quite heavily relies on immigrants from other nations coming and doing a lot of the labor in the farms and such. And it's the same in my country, in the UK. Prior to leaving the European Union, we also had a beneficial relationship with lots of neighbouring countries where immigrants would come to the UK and do work in farms and such. And subsequently, when we had Brexit, we lost a lot of that labour, and we've struggled since. But more importantly, there's an element, I think, of us needing to evaluate the actual value of some of these laws too, right? Because if we're spending all this money that we're not spending on things like schools and transport and healthcare, on sending what is essentially like masked gangs to go and chase up people whose only crime is that they've broken laws that were often like changed as of last year or last week or whatever, like, is this really an issue of morality or of justice? Like, because there's lots of things that are laws which we could easily say, okay, well, it's obviously wrong to kill someone or to vandalize like a public place, so we should have a law to say no, you shouldn't do that. But there's also laws which are not really of the same merit, right? Like, I mean, you don't have to look far in history to see where there's laws that weren't right and were overturned. We mentioned Jim Crow earlier, right? And now we come to ICE. We come to this law. Should people who've often been here for years and years, or any person, be brutalized and kidnapped and disappeared into a network of prisons because they've broken the law?
Well, there's a few things that you said there. Number one, the idea that the illegal immigrants that come here are doing work in the fields. For the most part, those are not illegal immigrants. For the most part, those are people who have come here legally, and then they go home at the end of the season. As far as the people who are here illegally doing jobs at a cheaper rate than Americans, that drives down the wages of the Americans that are here because they're working under the table, off the books.
Yeah.
And that personally has affected me and my wages.
Well, that's not
I'm
the
sure
immigrant's fault, though. That's the employer not paying. That's the employer saying, okay, well, I can exploit this labor to then get better conditions to make more profit. That's not the worker's fault, right?
That's both their faults. They're working together to make that particular wage happen. If the illegal alien's not here to take the wage, the employer can't hire that illegal alien, and he has to hire either a legal resident or an American,
but the worker,
or in your case, a Briton. This is just two people doing one thing that's wrong does not make it right.
But the worker that's being exploited, that's getting the undercut wage, they haven't chosen to get that wage. They're having to take that because they're in a precarious legal status, right? They can't access the same state benefits.
What is the legal state that they're in?
Well, as we've just said, right, they're not documented, so they're subject to persecution from ICE and other agencies.
They are breaking the law, and they're subject to prosecution from ICE. They're not here legally.
Persecution, yeah. That's
well, I mean, I guess you would persecute a bank robber.
I mean, I was a bank robber. It's a bit different to someone just trying to work at some a minimum wage job or something, right? But
Well,
the
absolutely
point is,
not.
with course is one
No,
one
I am a truck driver by trade, and
yeah.
I'm sure you're aware of the amount of truck drivers that are being stopped and arrested because they're here illegally, because a state has given them access to the licensing system and they've been given licenses. My wages are not going up at the rate that they should because there's cheap labor available. That's just a personal anecdotal situation, but that goes across everything, including the people you're talking about who are working in the fields. This is not only quashing the labor wages for the people that would be working there legally, but it's also keeping technology down. When the pecan
Okay.
growers could not, when the pecan growers couldn't find cheap labor to pick pecan trees, they found a way to get the pecans out of the trees without labor. And technology made pecans cheaper. So there's a multifaceted situation going on with illegal aliens. And I'm
But
not
all
against
those
immigration.
okay, but all the like all firstly all of those like facets you talk about, your wages not going up and such, the technology driving sort of production costs down. These are all mediated through the people in charge of production, the capitalists, right? The people who actually own the means of production, the tools to sort of do things. And so I think to blame, because like if you were competing with someone for a job, and you said like the first person comes in and says, "Oh, I would like this amount so I can afford my way of life," and then you say, "Well, I'll do the job." You have a lower sort of threshold for how much you'd be willing to accept for it, and the employer says, "Well, I'll pick you, Joe, and not the other guy." The other guy is not going to say, "Oh, Joe, how dare you? You've ruined my life. You've ruined my life." Like it's the person employing you that sets those rates, that sets the
You took one
conditions of
aspect
negotiation.
out, though. You took the illegality of the application of the other guy.
What's the illegality is immaterial to who sets the price, firstly, and secondly, why would it even like it's the same? You're the same. You're both people trying to survive in the world, right? To afford a house, food, bills. The only difference between the two of you is that one of you has the legal citizenship of the country and the other one doesn't. And I don't see that as something which is particularly scrutinable, because even like what you said earlier, right, about people coming across on a contract, say, to come and work in a on a farm or some production line and then go back to the country. Like those visas, the regulation changes quite a lot. Like there's lots of, especially in current times where the administration doesn't particularly have the consistency to care for lots of regulatory matters and such. Like they change it on a whim, and worse, the people actually doing the day-to-day ICE raids aren't versed in legal documentation. They just get anyone. There's been many accounts of people being abducted with legal documentation, and there being no recourse to actually say, and not even knowing where they are. Not forget actually being able to challenge the decision. They don't even know where their family member's been taken. They've been just put in a prison somewhere and not given the sort of spotlight to actually see where they are. So the idea that it's oh yes, well they've broken the law, therefore all of this is sort of sanctioned, I think falls apart really when we look at how it's happening, and doesn't even really sort of the key concept of this, because on some level, as Luke says in the chat, legality is something that we control. We've got to decide as a society, is it right that, I don't know, Jose somehow is subject to more penalties from our state organizations and such over some what is ultimately an arbitrary difference. There's no functional difference in what two people do beyond the things that have been artificially sort of put onto the you know situation.
I don't think we'll ever agree on the illegal immigrant situation. I know that a lot of people prefer to call them undocumented migrants, but I married a migrant. She got here legally, so she is a migrant. An illegal alien is someone who is not a member of the nation, and they're here illegally. That's how, illegal alien. And the idea that we can just say, well, this person picks peaches. I'm from Georgia. This person picks peaches, and this person picks peaches, and this person will do it for $25 an hour, where this person demands from the state at a minimum wage, $8 an hour. As far as I'm concerned, if the employer hires the illegal immigrant, he is just as culpable for breaking the law as the illegal alien, and they both should face consequences.
But one doesn't, though, and that's the sort of point we're making. The power dynamic is entirely, especially through the MAGA lens, shifted away from the capitalist exploitation, or corporate exploitation that lets, as in that scenario, lets someone pay 3 times less than what the $25 an hour person was making, and shunts it all onto the individual, who then is subject to state violence for ultimately having to, because it's not as though if the it's not as though the immigrant is choosing to have an undercut. They would also like to have the same wages as the indigenous population. They don't have the same legal status, a lot of them, and even when they do have legal status, they've got that sort of lower bargaining power because of their sort of marginalized status potentially. When you factor in like language, access to like state programs and such, and so they are coerced into having the lower wage by the capitalists, who then also is making tons more. They're not making $25 an hour; they're making millions more. They're extremely wealthy. So to focus away from the actual like wealth that could be shared equally or shared more equally, and then focus it on the lowest earning person in the whole sort of factor, is, I think, misguided. But also on that point, you said that your wife was a migrant and came across legally, and this isn't to make fun of anything. If you found out in a completely thought experiment, it's nothing, of course, personal, of course. If you found out one day that actually the legality of how she had arrived in America was not actually as scrutinable as she'd said, and it turns out that actually she wasn't here legally, would that change how you viewed your wife? Like, would that
100% it would change how I view my wife. If she's here illegally, if she came here breaking the law, then number one, she has to find a way to do it legally. And if that means she can't be here until she does, then she's got to go. Would it break my heart? Yes. But this is the ramifications of living in a nation of laws. I would like to go back and touch on the capitalist situation and that guy. I think that's a problem of the Republican Party, who's looking out for the bigger businesses. And I agree with you 100% that business owner should be held accountable for what they are doing, as much as the illegal alien. I think that quite possibly the business owner has more culpability, because they are an attractive hazard to the illegal aliens. And if we were to go after the business owners, pick one, let's call it Star Mart. I hope there's no place called Star Mart, but if you go after some place called Star Mart, and you went after them, and they had to pay billions of dollars, and a couple of their executives went to jail, that attractive hazard goes away, and there are no more illegal immigrants trying to get a job at Star Mart. So
I agree with 90% of what you said there, right? Absolutely. There's something, we definitely should be turning our attention away from just the average person in society and to these billionaire, massive corporations, which not only are exploiting workers, but also, don't pay their taxes, don't contribute to local economies, put local businesses out of business whilst they hoover up land and resources. Loads of really awful stuff, right?
Star Mart.
I like that. I might have to use that myself. But this, I think, ties into why we sort of, when we criticize MAGA, we're also sort of criticizing this really right-wing economic turn as well, right? Because it's not just the Starmart or whatever corporation are doing this because they're like, oh yes, we're evil tycoons wanting to ruin the world. Like, it's something they're economically incentivized to do, because the current organization of not just America but global economy is making as much profit as possible, making having as much literally in the system's name, like capitalism, you want to have as much capital as you can over others. And so because of these principles are sort of so infused into, again, not just the Republican Party, but also sort of just general mainstream American discourse, neoliberal discourse, it means that there's not the political levers or really mainstream sort of tools to say, yeah, there's something fundamentally at odds with a functioning society if we've got people incentivized just to make as much money as possible and flout whatever laws they can. And then also means that you get the disproportionate focus. I don't believe that the main driving sort of reason the billionaire is doing something wrong is because they've employed illegal immigrants. Like the issue is that, as you've said, they use a marginalized group, people who haven't got the societal status to bargain as well, to undercut people like yourself and other sort of people who have got the stronger sort of bargaining position, but are undercut by the sort of dodgy practices, and then not able to have their wages increase, or in some cases lose the jobs entirely. This is all the sort of the fault of the larger economic power here, because they ultimately set the conditions which cause it. And I think that to focus, the immigrant themselves ultimately is just another person like yourself or myself, who's just in society. Like you said a few times, we're a nation of laws, but like was said in the chat earlier, what is the value of a law if it isn't just? And the justice in this part is with the corporation exploiting their workers, not the labourer that happens to have had an extra legal manner of being in the country, or, as we've gone over a few times now, had their legal status changed and is now in the crosshairs of ICE. Hello, Robin, in the chat, by the way.
I think that the bigger problem, other than the capitalists or the big business that is trying to garner as much money as they can, is the politicians who are allowing them to do that by passing laws that favor big business and that give them the undue ability to hire an illegal alien or to hire someone at a ridiculously low wage. I'm not a fan of minimum wage. I'm not a fan of any wage caps. I don't think that there should be a cap on either end of the scale. I think that we kind of all have I'm not making Elon Musk's money because I'm a truck driver, but Elon Musk would never come down here and drive a truck. So I don't think there should be a cap on either side of that scale.
I think you're far more important than Elon Musk to our clients in the world economy. Personally, I think truck drivers are massively more important than some off the cuff figure in the we're counting as billions.
I think that they both have their place. I mean, the Starlink system that he's put up in orbit has really helped a lot of people around the world, including Ukrainian fighters, which I wish that war would end.
I would say definitely. I would say though that it's not, it's his money mover. It's not him actually doing those things, right? Like in the same way that if Elon Musk bought the company that you drive for, like you wouldn't say that he made you drive the truck. Like you're the person doing the labor that's actually driving around the country.
Let's be perfectly honest. If Elon Musk bought a company that I drove a truck for, there would be a lot of truckers out of work because there would be a truck driving itself. There wouldn't be a truck driver at the wheel. But the idea that I really put most of the onus on government rather than the businesses, because the government is making it possible for these businesses to do what they're doing. A government's primary function is to protect the nation and its citizens. And when they give preference to, as MAGA does, to these people running these companies and give them undue power, I think that drives us further and further apart from each other and makes us more and more look at each other as opposition people instead of just people that we're working together with.
I agree. It's the sort of in a functioning society, we need to have the organizational structures we have sort of working for the people who actually make up the fabric of society, and thus a functioning government, sort of no matter what sort of political perspective you're meant to come from, you're supposed to think, okay, well, how are we going to factor in everyone to be able to have a functioning society? Not, as you've just said with MAGA, like, sending off, doing Trump's business deals or whatever, or what's there's a UFC fight happening at is it WWE at the White House or some other nonsense?
I think it's UFC, but yeah, it's ridiculous.
just a waste of taxpayer money on
Sure.
just things like that. But I think again, this is where we would introduce that sort of critique of right wing ideas in capitalism, because the reason, like, it's easy to imagine government is filled with these cartoon villains, right? You have like eye patches and press buttons in a shady room saying, yes, right, it's time to bring down the everyman. But in reality, the economic forces that capitalism creates are a massive influence on why, as you said, businesses receive very favorable conditions and working wages don't increase for decades. Like minimum wage being so low and below the cost of living, is in large part because corporations use their economic capital to translate into political capital. They will literally lobby and fund people in government and sponsor them to say, well, no, we can't pay for anything apart from obviously going to war overseas and stuff, because it doesn't it's not in the interest of business. It doesn't help us grow the economy, which obviously the growth they're talking about is some corporation. That when they say, when Trump's going on about, oh yes, well, we have freed up all this business spending and such, they aren't talking about you and I being able to afford things more easily. They're talking about Joe, not Joe, sorry, yes, your name, I don't know, Stephen Oilwell, being more able to, he bought another yacht the other day. Now he's happy. He's more economically liberated. And so because of that, I think we've got to sort of connect the reason politics feel so corporate is because they're part of a wider economic system in which states become vehicles for capital. Whilst it's not ubiquitous, it's not as though people don't have agency. There are still we're not like in a completely 100%, there's no state whatsoever, it's just corporations. But because of the market forces that we exist around and through, this influences politicians, and obviously more so the more right-wing parties because they more closely adhere to capitalist ideas, but all of them are influenced by them to act on the part of business. And so, as you've said, corporations which are blatantly exploiting migrant labor won't be punished in the same way that the actual migrants will, because they don't get, that they're the people contributing the money. They're the ones that can say, well, if you punish us, we will take X amount of capital out of your economy. We will fund the other politicians. We will do things to leverage our capital over you. And so that's why there needs to be, I think, that critique of business rather than chasing after people that are also just part of your society as well, right? Like ultimately, the people that are being deemed as illegal and bad and such, like they're part of the neighborhoods and communities that make up America and the UK and whatever place they're in. And if we're going to say, oh, there's like a criminal element to them, well, there's criminality everywhere in society. It doesn't mean that it needs to be dealt with in a manner that sees us spend billions on them being plucked out of their community and put in a prison somewhere at the expense of billions. Anyway, you go ahead.
I break the law every day. I do. I think there was a study where they said that you break like 10 laws average every day that you don't even know about here in America. I'm sure same worldwide. The idea that I do break the law every day, and I break the law on purpose every day. I get on the road and the speed limit is 65 miles an hour and I do 71 miles an hour. I break the law every day. However, if a police officer sees me doing that and pulls me over and gives me a ticket, I earn that ticket because I broke that law. If someone comes into the country illegally and breaks that law, there's a repercussion. As far as the business side of things needing critique, absolutely. And most of the larger corporations have plenty of things wrong with them that they could have critique. And mostly that is allowed by the government. and it is endorsed by the government and is promoted by the government, and the government should surely stop most of that. That's the idea of the government, protect its citizens. On the other hand, on the left side of things, we have so much corruption, at least as much on the right as is, obvious in what is it, Minnesota, and the arrests that have just happened there because of the scandalous stealing of government funds by I'm sure you saw Nick Shirley and his Leering Center videos. This is all interconnected with big government and the two parties. And it's why I left both parties and finally the Libertarian Party, because I don't think government is the answer for very much when it comes to the low level employment and personal situations of the average person.
But the reason, because, again, a lot of interesting things there. Like, the reason I think that you're right in that, like, governments in the US and the UK is the same, right? Like, there's a disconnect between the way governments and parliaments and such operate and the stuff I discuss and the everyday lives that we have, right? Like, you go to the supermarket and the price of what you bought a week ago, a month ago, has massively gone up. I don't know about you, but bills for, I'm sure it's the same for you, right? Energy bills are like, everything just costs more and it's not great. But the reason that governments have struggled to actually do a lot, firstly, is an issue of focus of the media and such. Like, I think there's like an element of the good things that are done sometimes don't get coverage because it's hard to sell a news program that says, oh, actually things are doing all right, then, oh, right, time to focus on this really negative thing. But there are negative things, and they are negative because of the neoliberal capitalist paradigm that we've been in since the 80s, that say, okay, we're going to actually deconstruct and defund the ability of the government to actually do things, because we're going to hand things to the private sector. And that has a ripple effect on the quality of schools and healthcare and transport and just cultural things, like being able to access things like, like museums and libraries and recreational places and parks. And because all of these things, through austerity and through the defunding and such, because they all sort of slowly deteriorate and the government loses its ability to act over the market, this, and crucially, the government is filled with right-wing types that don't believe in, but rather are both funded and support corporations over people. They lose their ability to function and act and such. And I think that whilst it is true that this needs to change, the change, I mean, pragmatically, like, it's always sort of tricky, sort of thinking like, what's the perfect solution. Certainly not within this capitalist system we have now. But pragmatically within it, like, the clear answer is reversal of the neoliberal shift we saw that took steps considerably to the right, because we're in the UK as well, much more right-wing than we were 30, 40 years ago because of our economic policies and such. Reversing that would deliver much of the actual real-world positive effects to people like ourselves, in that it would take away resources and profit and wealth and such from massively over-rich corporations and put it back into public services and housing and all these things, which would bring the cost of living down and make things easier for people. And crucially, if you did this across the board, you would see a more equitable society in which you wouldn't be worrying. You wouldn't be thinking, oh, well, this person's going to drive my wages down. You think, okay, this is another person in my community that I can have a nice time with, and I can pursue my own interests. And in my case, I can do my sport and not have to worry about being able to actually afford to go for a swim or whatever. And it's all good.
I think the idea that government not having sway over the market is a good thing. I think that the government fiddling with the market constantly causes more problems than it helps. Specifically, the stock market. We had some car industries here in America that they had to bail out. 100% against that. Let them fail. The banks that they needed to bail out, they needed to fail. They needed to go away. and now we still have them. They're still doing the same policies that they did before the bailout. And this wasn't just the right. This was the right and the left that voted for these things to bail them out. And one of them was saying it was for the workers, and the other one was, obviously going for the businesses, when what really should have happened is these businesses should have washed out and been replaced by something much more efficient and perhaps better paying.
I agree. In the 2008 financial crash, it should have been a watershed moment. It should have been right. Okay, you guys have trashed the economy. These policies you've put in place are atrocious. It's time to not just lose your jobs, but some of you need to be investigated and off to prison for, basically like rigging the economy and such, right? But that doesn't happen. Firstly, because as we've been, there's an element of once you have that much wealth, you then have the ability to use it to avoid consequence and get around things. Not only with your money, but also sort of by influencing politics. But secondly, and I think this is where we're perhaps not communicating as clearly, the left you're talking about is still a right-wing movement, because it's still the Democrat Party who, for as much as they are better, like in the sense, not better, like they are, I suppose they are, but like they have positions of a more socially welfarist sort of leaning, right? They're more likely to do things that say, yeah, okay, we're going to fund this welfare program, or we're going to put in a free school meal policy. They still believe in markets. They still believe in the neoliberal interpretation of economic order. They still ultimately are loyal and adherent to capital and private industry and such, which explains why they were also willing to go along with what you've just said there, like bailouts and economic incentives and the sort of light, slap on the wrist, keep going as you're going, you'll be fine, and we'll have growth we need. And like still chasing growth, still chasing that pretty much ambivalent approach to running countries. And so that, I think, is why we don't have this left-right thing we're talking about here, because it's just right-wing and more right-wing, and the actual left-wing solution, which would be it's tricky because left-wing is such a broad term, but in general, if we're talking about an actual intervention on the order of capital and such, it would be something that would have to be quite radical, because it would depart from a lot of capitalist ideas, which obviously they don't want. So they put money, and they also critically put cultural elements in, which explains MAGA, into going after marginalized people. They distract from the corporate corruption and the massive wealth inequality and the obvious injustice of people not having food and not having access to human rights, at the same time as Billy Big Bucks, head of Starmart, counting his millions or whatever and buying his new yacht. And they distract from that by turning the attention to trivial things like, that person isn't documented, they're illegal, go and spend $1 billion on ICE to go and get
when you're talking about 10 million people, it's not really trivial.
However, it's not 10 million.
I believe that was the last number I saw for the Biden administration allowing cross the border illegally.
I mean, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of immigrants in America, but that's just the case anyway, right? Like, you're a nation of immigrants.
No, I'm specifically speaking of illegal immigrants.
But even if they were, I mean, for one, they're not. Let's have a look. Immigrants, population, US. It'd also be an estimate, right? Because it's not.
Well, yeah, that's the problem. There's a lot of gotaways.
But I mean, it's not even it's not. They're sort of, because of the nature. It's not as though 10 million people walked across the US-Mexico border, which also, by the way, is disproportionately focused on. It's also people's legal status changes, and they are thus rendered undocumented, or
that's a very small percentage.
Well, it's larger than you think, and it's also these people aren't just again materializing. They've also, a lot of them, just been here anyway and are actively contributing to the society, and crucially aren't the actual purpose of the issue that would be spoken about, and critically wouldn't be what was I going to say? They're not the reason for the problems we have in our societies, more than the actual, the issue. Any issue that you would bring up would be something which is controlled above their level, by the corporations talking about.
They're a symptom of the problem. They are definitely a symptom of the problem.
Even then, like the idea of just someone being able to someone thinking, oh, my life is tricky, I will go and work hard somewhere else, or I will go and find somewhere where my life will not be as hard, I will escape poverty, or even just wanting to be somewhere safer. These are very human things, but we should be thinking, okay, well, let's build a world in which people aren't overwhelmingly having to do this, which would also just bring immigration down a bit more anyway, right? Because the reason people come to the UK and the US is because we live in a very unequal world created by the conditions of our economic dominance over those nations. And if you address that as well, you would also just reduce immigration anyway. But it's silly because I also think ultimately we're all people and we should be working collectively to try and address the actual like corruption and such. But we've both been speaking about with the corporations and such.
I 100% would never call an illegal immigrant a non-person. They are a person. And I have said before, if I was in Mexico, I would try and find a way to get to America if it would better my life and my family's life. I'm not sure what we all would do when we're put in that kind of situation. But as a nation of laws, I'm not saying that a bank robber is a non-person either, but there are repercussions for what he does. There are repercussions for a guy who speeds down the interstate 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. He can get a ticket, and he has. There's also the ability for enforcement of the laws, and our laws say you have to come to America via this route to be here legally. To be here legally, and that's what the laws demand. We are a nation of laws. We are not a democracy. We are a republic, and as a republic, our demand is that these laws be enforced.
I mean, do you think that actually a democracy is what America is? Regardless of like how it's worded or whatever, like it's still meant to be like democratic principles and such, which are being undermined obviously by MAGA and such. But on what you've just said there, a bank robber a bank. I'm imagining someone who's like in Point Break, right? Where have you seen Point Break? With
I think
Patrick
so.
Swayze.
Yes, and the surfers.
Yes, yeah, good.
Yes.
Where they're sort of shooting up banks and they're doing like a big armed robbery. That causes harm. That damages things. That has a clear negative repercussion. The person speeding down the highway or motorway, we call it in the UK, at well over the speed limit, could crash into someone and inflict massive, potentially kill them. Right? That's a massive cause of harm. The person who is working for Starmart at the undercut wage isn't doing that same harm and is only doing that because of the wider economic conditions.
Lowering the wages of the fellow workers at Starmart?
They aren't doing that. As for the person that sets the wage is the person doing that.
They are doing it in partnership with the business. There's culpability on both parts. The business owner should definitely have more. It is though.
But it's the contract they sign. They don't even sign a contract a lot of the time, right?
No, there's no contract.
Exactly, right? Because they don't have the legal right. So they aren't an equal. It's not a partnership because there's not the equal power going into it. Like it's the corporation says, accept these terrible wages. Otherwise, a lot of the time, we'll report you to ICE. But it's also otherwise you won't be able to access the things on the market that you need to survive, like a house, a home, etc. And
the corporation and the illegal alien are doing he wants to put in his 2 cents, are doing a partnership in an illegal situation.
No, but it's not the corporation says you will accept these wages, that you will do this. The illegal immigrant has no choice, otherwise they won't be able to survive. That's not a partnership. That's a power difference, right? Like it's a differentiated places in a situation. It's like if your truck driving company said to you one day, right, tomorrow you're not going to be driving whatever you deliver, like just generic stuff, right? You're actually going to be delivering these weapons to some place. And if you don't, then not only will you be out of a job, we're also going to blacklist you from every other job in the area, and we'll report you to some agency. Like you've got then weighted circumstances in which you accept these conditions, and it doesn't matter that, like, because obviously in that situation it sounds a bit like fantastical, right? Like it's a bit of a comic book story where you're doing something like super dangerous. In this situation, that undocumented people face, they don't have the, it's like normalized almost for them to be in this position, because the corporations know that without their unfair terms of wage labor and such, they won't be able to survive. They'll be deprived from. It's not like yourself where you've already got sort of that existing. If you were let go, I don't know, is Georgia an at-will state? Like, do you have like severance pay and things like that? Brilliant.
No, so you can just be let go at the drop of a hat.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. But my point is, you at least, hopefully, because you've got existing sort of connections and such, you hopefully be able to like find an alternative source of work, which obviously is not the case for everyone. Like, a lot of people don't have that, but hopefully you've got those sort of fallback options, right? An undocumented worker doesn't have any of that. They don't have the same protections, and they also can't access many of the things that citizens can. So because of the sort of unfair structures of the system, and bear in mind these workers still contribute to the economy, and a lot of them still pay tax as well, right? So they lose out on these things, don't have the same positions going into the negotiation, and thus are forced to accept the unfair conditions that said employer then uses to say to the documented workers, well, we can pay these guys for much less, so you're going to accept our also stagnant or lower wages, otherwise we're letting you go. That is all on them. Like,
why are they here?
Because they wanted to, the undocumented workers?
Yes.
Well, because they want to have a better life for themselves.
They're trying to get that, in this case, that cheap paying job, so that they can send either money back home or provide better for their family.
Yeah, because America is a wealthier country than other nations, and because they also, these corporations in America want to make profit, and so they undercut countries like America and the UK have worker protections, or some worker protections, and there's more like certainly in the UK, right? There's things you have to do if you legally employ someone, and they work for you for a time, you have to provide benefits and holiday time, and you have to severance and all these sorts of things, right? If corporations want to make more money, then not doing those things is economically beneficial, and so they're willing to then hire people that they know will have to accept poorly paid jobs because it's beneficial economically for them, and in the full knowledge that the arm of the law goes after, I don't know, Jose, the undocumented person, rather than Starmart, the multi-billion corporation. So it, as a consequence, is really necessary for us as critics to think, okay, rather than sort of making it a moral argument for some person that is probably just the same as us, just from another country, we should instead, and often, by the way, not from another country, because they'll have been here for so long that they've, actually grown up in America or in Britain or whatever, but instead turn to the corporate side of things, the capitalist side of things, that are ultimately the people with the actual capital to dictate the terms of the economy.
I can agree with a lot of what you said. I think that we need to go after Starmart. Starmart's really the incentive for the illegal aliens to break the law in the first place. So if we go after Starmart and we stop Starmart from doing this illegal activity, would that appease the left? I don't think it would.
Well, no, I think it's definitely, again, the left is a very broad term. Certainly my left, I think you would probably consider very far left. But, it's in terms of people of the sort of conservative Republican position, a lot of them, yes, definitely want more action to be taken against corporations, and not just for dodgy employment practices, but also just because, we've got like schools where they don't have enough pens for the kids, and at the same time, the owner of Starmart is sailing around the Mediterranean on their super yacht that goes 100 miles an hour, or whatever. So yeah, definitely like taking on corporations, 100% easy. Like, I think probably across the board, most people want that to happen. There's few people have been like, yes, I'm a big Starmart fan. They should be able to just do as they please. But But as well as that, like was said in the chat earlier, where's it gone? Yeah, ultimately human beings are all human beings, and we'd rather live in a world where we're not punishing people just for moving from place A to place B, where we're all sort of working together and our communities aren't like dictated by things which don't really mean a lot. Because like ultimately, like the fact that it takes ages to get into Western countries, like the process to actually be a legalized citizen is ridiculously long. And that's in part because of the nationalism, the long history of racism, the fact that our Western nations own so much wealth over the rest of the world means that the nationalist argument exists of the capitalist argument to try and protect that wealth from other people, which, by the way, isn't necessarily like the wealth that is in the nation is disproportionately owned by corporations, but realize as well that if enough people point out that Starmart, say, owns more than several states and should probably have to pay some of that back in tax, they would lose some of their capital. And so they turn public focus away from wealth inequality or defunding of things or cost of living crisis, and instead have a look at, oh, well, this immigrant has done this. These people are doing terrible things. There's so much fraud from immigrants stealing money from the welfare system, whatever. Like just things which are nebulous and often just false, and don't matter compared to the other issues, but are focused on to prevent that justice from happening.
So the idea that government is not doing this well enough for either side. The right is saying that the left is corrupt and they're stealing money, and the left is saying the right's not doing enough to help the citizens or non-citizens or whoever you want to put out there. The government's not doing a good job. So my question is the answer more government?
But the government, the left you're talking about is the Democrat Party, who are right wing, and in the UK, the left is the Labour Party, who are neoliberal and have the same right wing principles. Like the kind of thing that we would actually call left wing. Like if we had a genuinely egalitarian approach where we're saying, yeah, let's actually put serious funding into schools and healthcare, and let's make it so that human rights are actually people have a mandated right to be able to have a decent meal every day and a place to live and access to things that they need to survive. Like these are left-wing positions, and they're also radical alongside the right-wing sort of normative stuff we've got now. And so, the Democrats, I think, have a lot of it's a broad party, a lot of people in that party, but certainly Kamala Harris, when she was running, she ran from a right-wing position. Joe Biden did some good things in terms of labor rights and such, but was also still a right-wing president who did things which supported a right-wing worldview. And fundamentally, none of them question the fundamental organization of the country around these corporate economic principles. So to answer your question, I think framing it in terms of more government, I think, is not quite how I would phrase it, because it's not ultimately in our current economic system. The government and the state are just sort of mechanisms and vehicles, right? Like it's not that the government should be expanded; it's that the power of corporations and of right-wing sort of ideas is deconstructed to move to one in which the average person is more able to participate in their life equally, with actual they can actually get on how many places. America's a massive country, right? How many parts of America have no transport links, no internet links, no just disconnected, right? Like no shop that's not Walmart for miles because they bought up all the I didn't say Starmart, did I? I'm gonna
Starmart, please.
Starmart, yeah, Starmart. No shop over in Starmart.
We probably should do a Google search to make sure there's not a corporation called Starmart.
Exactly, right. Billy Big Bucks Incorporated. They have a massively disproportionate control of not just the economy and of land and such, but also of politics, because there's no voice that challenges them, or not seriously enough. And the ones that do get they get accused of being like open communists or something, and then get stopped from running. So it's frustrating, I think, to because we seem to be in agreement on a lot of things in the sense that we want justice for corporations, but rather than thinking of a sort of left-right divide and then going back to the same like I don't know, talking points about immigrants and such, I almost think like there should be we need to actually say we've had these right-wing ideas and principles for a very long time. If we want to actually start improving the material conditions of people's lives and the cost of living crisis and such, let's put in place the things in our community that take money away from and take resources away from some private entity, and let people in communities actually have the means to improve people's material conditions.
I can see what you're saying. I don't think that the mechanism we need to use is government to make that happen, unless we're taking government out of the situation. So there are places where we need government. We have some socialist programs in America, the fire department, the ambulance department, the water department. These are all, socialist programs that we have.
Social rather than socialist, because socialist is worker controlled, right? Like the idea that there's genuine, equitable, democratic processes that organize these things. And whilst these programs are social in that they are funded by the state and have rather than sort of a private corporate
nothing
directive.
Is funded by the state.
Sorry?
Nothing is funded by the state. Everything is funded through taxes. Nothing is funded by the state.
Yeah, as in like the country raises money through tax and then the state allocates it. That's what I mean by state funded. It's like it's
okay.
Coordinated through the government and the country, rather than say a corporation makes revenue and then decides where said revenue is allocated. Right.
But the idea that the government is going to solve this without funds from the cat is using my leg as a scratching post. Sorry. But the idea that the state is going to somehow miraculously fix these problems when they have not been able to handle anything up to this point. And I cannot think of a single government that has gotten better, no matter what form of government they've been.
But the reason that, like we said, the reason the states have been struggling these in recent times, certainly for my lifetime, right, is because they are tethered to this neoliberal capitalist paradigm, right? Like they can't. So, for instance, when there's no buses that run from town A to town B, they can't say, yeah, well, let's just put a bus there, because there's no money for there's not the resources allocated to the department to actually put the bus route in place. When the school says, oh, well, we've actually run out of money to pay for textbooks or pens, can we have some more, please? They can't get it because the budget's gone, because they've not got enough to match the rising cost of electricity bills or said public transport links or whatever. It's the case that governments and people because government isn't just like a hive mind, like it's lots of people who come together to form the assemblage. And said politician, say, that wants to improve funding for schools is one node of a network which is tethered to principles of leaving the market to do what it needs to. Corporate wealth is corporate wealth, and it grows the economy, so let's not challenge it. And that means a lot of people are left behind. And so when we're saying, certainly, like Robin says, right, everything's for profit. It's not something that is done because of the social good. It's done because it's profitable. It helps the GDP go up or whatever. The change we're seeking, certainly from my perspective as someone that is very left-wing, is one, I think, which divorces from, also, in the long run, divorces from the sort of state versus corporation dichotomy anyway, right? But pragmatically, in the short term, in the sort of here and now, what we could do is one that says, okay, let's actually put resources into a more equitable form of organization that say, okay, well, we need public programs that have the money to function. We need people to eat and go to school and have healthcare, and all these things will cost money. So unfortunately, Billy Big Bucks Corporation, you can't have $1 trillion this year as your revenue. You're going to have to put some of that back into the countries that you're in. And we know there's enough to do this because these corporations are richer than any other time in history. Like, they're as rich as pharaohs and the power of emperors, and they, as we've said, can basically use this money to shape politics. And in the sense that, like, you've never seen government run effectively, whilst it's a bit sort of course there are sort of always been such problems and such, we can see that in countries that use their resources to have social programs, there are benefits. And even in America, the Democrat states and the Democrat run places that aren't, obviously you get plenty which are rubbish, right? But the policies in which there are existing programs for people are good ones that have massive benefits for people using them. And critically, when they're taken away, you see a lot of problems with people that actually don't have the means to compete on the market and suffer. And so, whilst this isn't like oh yes, the Democrats are brilliant, because I'm the Democrat, I don't support that party, like, we can still see that where people adhere to measures that would be considered left-wing interventions upon capitalist policy, there are lots of really good things, and they aren't like far off things that are impossible to achieve. They're things that are happening right now in lots of places, and if given the backing, could be massively beneficial for a lot of people.
I agree with you, but I think it has to be voluntary. I don't think that we can mandate that a corporation or an individual or a state. California has the third largest economy in the world, something like that, third or fourth, and people are leaving California. A mass exodus because the taxation there is so high that people don't want to be there. They can't make any money.
I mean, mass exodus.
Absolutely. This is the rich people are leaving both New York and California to find better, less taxing states and places to live.
I'm sure there's some people who some individual people who think, yeah, well, I want to have more money or less money for contributed to the state or whatever. But firstly, like, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, right? Because it's not as though like every single person's just like upping roots and going, right?
So I get the feeling that you're toward the socialist end of the scale, away from. Okay. I mean, which socialist government has worked out? Not program, but which socialist government has?
I would say that there has not been a socialist government, because socialism is the worker ownership of the means of production. It's a system in which the tools of society are controlled democratically across the board. So that's not just like, oh yes, in my neck of the woods, but it's something that you would have to see really across the globe, right? Because you can't. One of the principles of it would be that rather than dividing ourselves into like national borders and such and national separations, we're all ultimately human. And so whilst we have differences, we come together to, we're like you and I are both on the same planet. And so even though you're American and I'm British, we would sort of work together. This is not the thing that we saw in countries which did not have the sort of Western version of capitalism, like the Soviet Union or whatever. Like, they weren't socialist. They certainly had state-run programs, but they weren't democratically coordinated because the state like took over, right? Like, it was.
That's kind of the progression of socialism. Eventually, you get people in power that are taking over and doing what they want instead of what the majority, or what I like to call mob rule, wants.
But firstly, that what you've just described there is exactly what's happening in capitalist states right now. The corporations have taken over and basically pull the strings to ensure they avoid consequences ever. And secondly, the core sort of point of left-wing discourse is to like break down unjust power structures and deliver democratic ones, like you say, right? Like the idea that people would be able to have an influence in their lives. And so when we look at the history of the Soviet Union, for instance, the revolution in 1917 happens, but it happens in the middle of a world war. And so rather than like being the sort of sweeping, the people rise up across the globe, like was envisioned by people in Russia and such, it is isolated to within Russia. It is met with a backlash from right-wing nationalists who are then, there's a civil war going on. Because of this, you've got tricky, there's a fact, like it's tough economic conditions anyway because it's in a war, but then you've got a famine, you've got the intentional destruction of stuff going on. And then in that sort of power struggle, you've got the Stalinist faction, which then ultimately take control and deliver the version of the Soviet Union that eventually happened. It is worth stressing, of course, that whilst there were many horrible things about the Soviet Union, the areas that were closer to the sort of actual socialist policies and such were much better. People actually had a home, people could have access to food and such, like, which both those things aren't true of the capitalist West. So
who are they fighting?
Sorry, what, the Soviet Union?
Who were they? Who was Russia fighting? You said they were fighting someone at that point.
In World War One or in?
Was it World War One and World War Two?
So in World War One, in Russia, Russian Empire was in World War One,
right?
And also obviously they're involved in the whole power struggle occurring in Europe. But because the Russian royal family actually were related to the British royal family, and essentially all royal families in Europe, all royal families in Europe are quite related. It's a bit incestuous, really, when you think about it. But
like American politics.
Yeah, well, exactly right. The right-wing nationalists didn't want to give up the power of the Tsar, and they wanted to have that control and such, right? So they didn't just accept the Russian revolution; they wanted to take back control. And so there was a civil war, which the Bolsheviks eventually won, but obviously it came at a cost. A lot of people died. A lot of people, and you got to remember as well, the country's already in a world war, so it's not exactly in the position to reform itself and then have exactly the outcome it wanted. But all of that is to say that we should still be thinking critically about our capitalist structures, which have done all the things that you would make the criticisms of the Soviet Union of the Soviet Union, and also like worse, right? Because we're in this moment in time a position where the Trump administration is actively putting in the places, to become an unquestioned dictatorship, right? Like it's deconstructing many of the rules of law, which would challenge its
I think
situation.
Part of the problem with the Trump administration is that he's using the executive orders to do these things. And he's doing the same thing that the Democratic Party did. And I know this is a left-right thing and that, you're further left than the Democratic Party, but the idea that the government can be set up so that no corruption happens it's a fantasy. We can't do it every time. I mean, even your Russian example. Your Russian example shows that they did that.
But okay, but I don't think that's true though, because I mean, for one, I don't think anyone like left wing says yes, we're going to have a utopia. But we can clearly see, okay, this is something that's not working. Let's address things and aim to have a better place in time. And saying we want there to be no corruption is the end goal. We can do things that make there be less corruption, one of which is radical intervention upon massive sources of wealth that corrupt. If we act against corporations, we can deconstruct the mechanisms for which the government is corrupted. Like that's a no-brainer. And I also think I don't think it's a fair comparison, right? I mean, Robin is making quite a point in the chat, right? Like, I've got no doubt there are some Democrats who aren't the most honest with where they get their money from and where they're funded and such. There's no comparison between any Democrat administration and this current Trump administration. And I would also say that whilst I'm very critical of the Democrats,
I agree. President Obama definitely, killed a lot more people than Trump did. There is no comparison. They're both bad. Both of them.
You're not going to see me defending the foreign policy of Barack Obama or any administration in decades, right? 100%. they did many things. I mean, as a famous quote, right? All these presidents could be sent off to the Hague for various reasons. And the point you should take from that isn't, oh, well, both sides are bad, but that the American system of capitalism has a uniquely, well, not uniquely, but like it through its pursuit of capital creates warfare and destruction and death in the interest of making money. Like the reason there's so much war overseas is because the American pursuit of capital sees it chase oil, most obviously, but it wants to have that global hegemony, that influence, because they want that money. They want the stuff they need. But again, it's like, whilst I'm critical of Obama, I don't think we can I bet there's clearly an escalation from Obama to Trump and from Biden to Trump that we're seeing in the sort of just rampant violence that is there. I mean, again, the cancellation of US aid, 800,000, through the lack of resources that have been taken out, has a massive death toll. And whilst
there's no money,
but there is money. Like, it's been spent on ice.
How many trillions of dollars are we in debt right now in America? The national debt, I think it's coming up on $35 trillion. We're not only is there no money, we're overdrawn. We're so far in debt that we can't pay our debts.
But whom are you in debt to? Who is America and the UK and all these other countries in debt to? Like where?
Mostly to other countries. There are a lot of treasury bonds. I mean, I'm okay with saying, you know what, we're bust. We're going to declare bankruptcy. It's going to cause total global upheaval, but perhaps that resets what we're all looking for. The idea that we can just keep printing money until, here's the perfect example. My father, when I was 19 years old and going into the Navy, made $11.25 an hour. Through inflation, for me to make the same money that my father made, I would have to make $42.50 an hour, give or take a little bit of change. And the idea that someone who made $11.25 in the late 70s, early 80s now has to make $42.50 is outlandish. $42.50 is it's horrible. There's no money. And every time they print another $1 trillion, the power of the dollar falls, and there's nothing for us, there's just nothing for us to do.
But the core theme there, because I completely agree, right? Like everything, like the idea that I, as a student, am going to buy a house like my parents did, is just like, there's no way, right? Unless I discover some sack of cash somewhere, like it's just not happening. So, I mean,
I want to come back to that.
Exactly, right? But it's the core theme is that we live in a country in which the economic levers are, countries even, the economic levers are controlled privately. There's not that democratic say that we'd be able to have where we say, okay, there's clearly something wrong where, as Eve just said, the cost of living's gone up 4 times or whatever since the previous generation, and we've got all this money just sat in corporate hands. Because that's the other core thing. Like, we're talking about, as you've said, like the debt is rising, there's not the money for programs, people can't afford to get by. But one thing that isn't suffering is corporate wealth. The neoliberal turn since the 80s has handed massive financial power through deregulation, through economic incentives, through tax breaks, through outsourcing stuff to other countries and such. It's handed all this power to corporations that then get basically the soft and hard power of writing their own policies to put into place. And I think that, when we're saying, oh, yes, the government can't do this, they're running out of money, there's this, both sides are failing, both sides adhere to this corporate dominance in their own ways, of course, but, still ultimately right-wing and adhering to it. And the change that would be needed, certainly just on the short term, is just one that says, no, okay, it's time to actually reverse this trend. We're going to say, you are giving us back. I mean, you say it has to be voluntary, but they're never going to voluntary. Like, if you are Star Mart, this amazing corporation, and you've just bought the latest Lamborghini and Ferrari, and you've got the world's best set of cars, like, you're not going to give it up on purpose. You're not going to say, yeah, time to give this up, guys. Of course, you want to keep your financial power. So you need to say, okay, you've had your chance, and the world's like, we can't afford milk every other day, so we're now going to say you're not going to be a billionaire anymore. It's time to, certainly not the approaching trillionaire like some billionaires are. Like, it's time to now put this money back into public services and do things for the benefit of everyone, so that we can, improve things. Dargesh, hello Dargesh in the chat. How early must it be for you, Dargesh? Wages have stagnated, so the rich can make even more money. Ultimately, that's the thing that's happening, right?
So we're going to take all of the money from the rich, and if we took the top 1% of the money from the rich, we could run the country for 1 year. This is the latest static. This cat is clawing me.
No.
It's the latest statistic that I've read. Okay, this isn't going to fix the problem. What's going to fix the problem is capitalism, and we need to get away from cronyism, because what you're describing is cronyism. What you're describing is StarMark CEO is calling up his senator and saying, push this bill through for me. I need this to happen so that I can. That's cronyism. That's not capitalism.
Cronyism. Why does that cronyism happen? Like, what's the driving? Why does the businessman say, you need to sign this for me?
Unfettered greed. Greed is not a bad thing. Unfettered greed is a bad thing.
But where did that come from? It's not as though like he just woke up and said, "Yes, it's time to ruin lives today." Like,
it is the human condition.
I mean,
greed is the human condition. It might not be your human condition or my human condition, but there are people in this world whose condition is to constantly try and get a higher score. They think this is a video game.
Yeah, that's produced by the system that incentivizes that, and like you can still chase like the higher score. Like, I'm a big sports fan. I love sport. I love I'm not a professional athlete or anything, but I like winning. I like running. I like all of that. That's different to like economic dominance over people. Like, it's different to people want to win, sure, but winning doesn't have to be like, oh yes, give me $1 billion and defund the whole school system. And what you said just then, like the idea of what did you say? What you said something just before you said about the human condition.
The human condition is greed.
No, but it's not greed. Like your cat there. Like if the human condition was just greed, you wouldn't. You'd think, oh well, I don't need this pet. It's taken out of my economic incentives. I have to spend money on its veterinarian bills and food and whatever. Well, no, of course not, because actually having companions and having people around us, it's an animal, I guess, but like, it's
by the way, that's one of 4 cats.
4 cats? Oh wow. Yeah, I hope you've got lots of scratches then if they're
This table's in pretty sad shape, but yeah, no, it's
well, I would say happy shape. It's been a much loved table for your animals, right?
Oh, the table I grew up on, I'm sitting at.
Oh wow, okay.
It is over 50 years old. And when it comes to this table, I'm greedy. No one else can have it.
But like, you see my point, right? Like, if we were truly just like, oh yes, greed is the only thing that animates us, like we wouldn't be doing a lot of things we do. Like, I wouldn't care about my favorite sports team because they're not technically of my interest. They're not my economic incentive. Like, Robin in the chat also has four cats as well. But it's ultimately cultivated by our economic system, which increasingly incentivizes. I mean, just look at what Trump does, like, in this current administration, where he actively rewards his corporate friends and encourages people to act, oh yes, America first, chase the big dollars and trade and such, like, and trade only with America. Like, that is what he has set up as the incentive, which then, as a second order thing, becomes the learned behavior of lots of people who then also think, oh well, we can't take money and put it into our public programs because it doesn't have human nature in mind, when ultimately this is just learned. Dargesh suggests removing money from politics, raising taxes on the wealthy, and empowering unions to truly make America better. Things that if you had the
what's the number one purpose of a union?
Collective bargaining. Working together to be able to avoid
to get more conditions from the company. Greed.
But that's not greed. That's looking out for you're stopping the greed of the corporate. Like, the union exists because
there's different levels of greed. There's different levels of greed.
but one of those things is I'll come on to work in a second, Patriot 1428. He's left a comment in the chat. One of the corporation is greedily chasing more extracting power from their workers. So, you imagine some factory somewhere, Billy Big Bucks, probably called William Big Bucks back then, more formal. They want to take more from their workers to maximize productivity and have a bigger sack of cash at the end of the day. The workers are like, well, why are we working like 14-hour shifts on the factory floor? This isn't very fair. I can't individually go to the boss and say, pay me better, because he'll just fire me and get someone else in. But if all 1,000 of us on the floor say we're going to withhold our labor until you pay us better, the corporation has to do it, because then they've not got a workforce and productivity stops. Therefore, the union protects them, and through workers' movements earns them weekends, overtime pay, paid sick days. All these things have been earned. And that also intentionally is why the right-wing turn to austerity has also seen the deconstruction of many workers' rights, the loss of power for unions, the restrictions on when workers can strike, because all these things are things which disrupt capital and make it easier for workers to have a bigger portion of power in negotiations. And so if you're Billy Big Bucks, it's in your interest to deconstruct these tools. And so the union is deconstructed or outlawed in some cases. The workers are individually competing with each other. They don't have the same power in the negotiation and get undercut. And then bring us right back around to the illegal immigrant. They aren't able to unionize either. They can be paid the sub-minimum wage, rubbish wage. The worker in the country already has their wage reduced and their ability to access the society reduced.
Dargish just kind of put a definition of another type of greed up there.
Which one?
Dargish describing the union.
This one here?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's not greed, but it's
a lesser greed. It's not unfettered. It's a lesser greed. They want the better things for their family and themselves. That's a want. That's a greed. It's a lesser greed, but it's still a greed. It's a human condition, maybe?
Necessity. Like, one is wanting a fair, like, because you got to remember as well that they're already like massively underpowered in this exchange, right? Like, the corporation is profiting from their labor and has a more powerful position in the negotiation. They just want some of the way towards an equal. Like, an equal thing would be the workers actually having like the democratic control of what they're doing, right? They should be like on the I don't know, Ford factory floor, right? The people who actually make the cars should have a say in what happens with the cars, not the person on the top.
How far do you take that?
Well, it's democratic, right? So like, at the moment, the owner of the entity has complete control, and their board and such, and their shareholders, who then decide everything with the process. So what happens on the factory floor, what the car, where the cars are sent, where the resources come from, prices that are set, etc., etc. And so when economic crashes happen, in large part because they're just chasing endless profit, and you can't profit endlessly, the people who feel the repercussions are the workers, who get all laid off. They say, "Oh, well, sorry, we're closing the factory. Doesn't matter what happens to you guys, but we're relocating our factory to, I don't know, Bangladesh or some other country that doesn't have the same labor protections, and workers in the Western country get laid off, and they're on hard times." In a fairer system where workers had democratic control, this would be mediated. So if it was genuinely more efficient to produce the cars in a different country, you would have a process through which the people who had been previously making the cars would be looked after, and maybe wouldn't have to chase around looking for a new job or face starvation and homelessness and such, right?
No, I literally, this is an anecdote from my life. 4 years ago, I was at a job that I was miserable in. I was making a lot more money than I'm making now, and they started treating us poorly. So I decided I wasn't going to be treated like my personal saying is, I'm not going to be treated like a forklift. I'm not a piece of equipment. And when you start treating me like a forklift, I start looking for another job. So I went out and I found another job, and that's this job I'm in now, which was one of the better jobs in our city. And I decided I wanted that job, so I went after it. And when I got it, I left my other job, and I let them know under no certain terms why I was leaving. Now it's up to management there to either change or not. And I have a friend that's still at that job, and from what I understand, they are losing drivers constantly because they cannot keep them as well paid as they are. And I think they're about 20% better paid than I am, but I'm happier making less money with a good company. I
Okay.
voted
Well,
with my feet. I am a
I'm very
union of
glad.
one.
Okay. I'm very glad that you were able to get a better situation for yourself. Obviously, I'm happy that you're happier and in a less stressful place or whatever. But you still see that in that example, whilst obviously you're happier and no one, you can't put a price on happiness, and stress is something that definitely no one needs in their life. But you accepted a lower salary to make this move, right?
Yes.
People who lose their jobs and say can't accept a lower salary aren't in that position because, like, let's say you needed a certain wage to be able to afford all your bills and such. Like, if you go below that rate, you now can't afford something that you need, like, say, energy bills or transport costs or whatever. And now you're in a precarious situation. So that example doesn't actually, like, it's not one that's going to be accessible, I think, for a lot of people, which is sort of the whole point we're making. And there's also a point that, you know I don't think, I mean, I'm happy that you're in a better place now that you've moved and such, but people in a democratically organized system would be able to address the, like, core factors that make a workplace not wanting to stay in and such, rather than be told, well, shove it, guys, we're the boss, you
You're
gotta sort of just listen.
you're describing a lot of upside things, but there's some downsides to a democratically ran company as well. For instance, 51% of the people can vote themselves a raise. There are, 51% of the people can vote that this part over here is going away because it's not as profitable as well. 51% of the people can do anything they want. I've experienced this firsthand as well, in an HOA situation. So this all is not, nothing is perfect. There's not a perfect system out there, and because people are corruptible, there has to be checks and balances. And right now, the checks are way out of control in government. There's not enough
No,
balance.
it's the opposite. I mean, the checks don't exist on corporate power, which is the reason we've got all these issues occurring in the first place. Like, the checks that exist, as we've said as well, like, because corporations water down the actual power of regulation and such, because they intervene whenever someone says, like in 2008, hey, we've got massive parts of our economy just blatantly corrupt and not functioning. Like, nothing is done, and so the same problems and same corruptions keep on occurring. If there was actual, because you've got to remember as well, it's not as though when we say democratic corporations, that isn't referring to, like, a homeowners organization, or like just some business where, like, Bob and Jim can sit down and say, hey, we're going to spend this much here and this much there. It's across the board, right? It's something which says every part of this mechanism of society, or of this particular structure, functions with the minds of everyone involved in the process. And that isn't to say that, like, I don't know, Jim the cleaner is asked how the Golden Gate Bridge will function this year. But clearly, there is some elements of, okay, well, Jim the cleaner is actually someone that contributes to the functioning of society and therefore should be involved and informed about how society functions. Because, you say, oh, well, 51% of people could do something which might have an adverse effect, but that is it's not as though the improvement just comes as, like, a purely lifting one thing over to another. It's a wholesale societal shift that would be sort of adhered to and argued for, because you're trying to think about how the world can be improved, and parts of our society can be improved, and part of that is taking power away from billionaires that only are in their own interest. How many times have we seen, like I think about phones, for instance, right? Like, the phone is an amazing bit of innovation, but it is intentionally encumbered with things which make it worse on purpose to sell more phones. Like it stops working after a few updates because they've got a new phone out and they want you to go and buy the new phone. They make it only if you buy an Apple phone, for instance, you can only buy Apple things because they want you only spending your money there. Internet could be something which is just universal and free and everyone can access it, but they want to make money off it, so you have to pay for an internet bill when it could be something that is just provided for. So many ways that something which is an amazing capacity to do something is
how could the internet just be provided? I don't get that.
Okay, well, think about how much money internet service providers and tech companies have. If those resources were put into improving the frameworks and structures of it and actually activating it for everyone, you could have much better coverage across the board for everyone, and use the tools of society to actually keep on improving it instead of having it all disappearing into some bank account somewhere. And
so make it a non-profit.
Yeah, like the whole, I think the overall goal is saying, yes, profit as a motive has not worked in large parts of our economy, and we need to deconstruct the capitalist incentive we're putting there. We can keep talking about this.
It's worked in the cellular phone part of the economy, though.
Well, worked in the sense that a lot of people are very rich from it, but there are still problems. And the fact that it's ubiquitous now, I mean, a lot of people still don't have up-to-date stuff. A lot of people can't access the more modern stuff. And crucially, the money that's being spent actually accessing these things stops us from accessing a lot of other stuff, which we could enjoy more if we weren't having to spend hundreds on other things that are artificially inflated in price.
But the money has to be spent.
Sorry?
The money has to be spent from somewhere. The money has to be provided. It's not free.
No, I'm sorry, I'm lost. Sorry. The money has to be provided to do what?
To create a cell phone, to create better internet, it all has to come from somewhere, and the incentive is through a company to make a profit.
That incentive is artificially created by said. Of course, the corporation is going to say, "Well, you need us," because they want to maintain their power. You could still create the things. The labor creates it. The corporation is just who's currently organizing it. We could have a more democratic way.
Which corporation? AT&T, Verizon, WOW. I think there's 6 in this area. Which corporation is doing this?
Well, all of them participate in the same structures. I mean, they all still have the same class dominance over others. But it's interesting, isn't it, that 6 corporations control the majority of internet in the entire country, right? And it's the same in the UK.
No, that's just my area.
Well, like a handful. I mean, Georgia's not a small place, right? But
no, I'm talking about just in this. It's called the CSRA, Central Savannah River Area. Just in this area.
Okay, but it's not as though like you've got. I mean, it's a false choice, right? Because ultimately they all still, they offer variations on the same, practice of you giving them lots of money for them to profit off. And it's the same in the UK. Like, we could have a system in which this was done as a public utility. Like, we in the modern age, the internet has become very important. It's useful for people to be connected. It's therefore in the best collective interest for the internet to be a service which is provided for people by people, not as some profitable business venture that lets them have disproportionate control over the economy or parts of the economy, and therefore stop things moving in any way that is against their own interest, which often means poor practices taking place, and in large parts of the country not even having an internet service. I mean, the UK is obviously a lot smaller than America, like just geographically, but we've still got loads of rural areas which have atrocious internet, really abysmal, and they don't care because they think, there's only 100 people living here, so we don't need to bother putting down any cable or anything because, why spend money where it's not profitable? That means there's people who don't have the same, that wouldn't be able to hop onto this call right now and have a chat. And obviously, like our, this YouTube stream is not like the be all end of life, obviously, but like in more important ways, where it's like accessing information or communicating with family and stuff like that is a lot of stuff that's been missed out on. So I do think it.
I can't comprehend the idea that needs to be a public utility, because I keep coming back to these anecdotal things, but literally they fit into the conversation. I just switched phone services because The phone service I had, T-Mobile, was absolutely abysmal in the country, out in the rural areas where I go. So I had to switch, and I switched to something that not only was better coverage, but absolutely better price-wise. They won my money. They won myself as a customer. And the same thing with my home internet. The competition is what's driving prices down. The lack of competition and what you're describing, collusion, which is illegal, would drive prices higher. And the
I
problem
mean,
may
that's
be that the government is not going after the companies again who are colluding.
okay,
So
but I mean,
more
firstly,
government is bad.
that isn't that we're not. What I'm advocating for isn't just like slapping on more government officials into things. It's a wholesale democratic realization of the process. Like you're still, for as much as you say you've got a better internet, you've still had to accept their conditions to access what should be something everyone should be able to access, which is you're forking over a load of money every so often, every month probably, to access it. Like
$62.
which is a lot, right? Every month, and that also means that eventually, when they put the price up, because as for everything else, the cost of accessing the internet is also going up. Like it increases, and it's also like it's not. The competition is a false one because whether it's T-Mobile or AT&T or whoever it is, they still profit. They still benefit from this transaction because they all ultimately get generating enough money to get their disproportionate power of the service. They're still able to dictate terms. If they all decided, well, we're going to put our price up this month, as they all do, because ultimately they do it at different, one does it and the next does it and the next, like they're all just going up. Like if you don't agree with that, you can't. Your choice isn't, oh well, I'm going to change this. You either accept the rising cost or have no internet. Like that's not a choice. That's not.
That's what I did.
No, but
It is a choice.
But okay, but you have switched internet now, and you're
Yes.
paying. Are you paying the same, more, less? Like, have you?
Less.
Fantastic.
Less. For the phone. For my home internet, they wanted to go up to $90, and I called them up and said, well, wait. I called them up and I said, okay, I need to cancel because I'm going to switch to this other service provider. And immediately they said, well, what if we just kept it where you're at? Okay. This is competition in action.
Not, I mean, for one, they do that because a lot of people won't have called up, and a lot of people
absolutely.
So already there's a bit of a like the person is at a disadvantage because they're having to take time out of their day to try and get a better thing, which a lot of people won't, and they know that and don't have the means to. But secondly, like there's now nothing stopping in the future this corporation from putting their price up, knowing that you came to them to get away from a cheap price, and they only have to either set it to lower than whatever the T-Mobile, I guess, were offering, or wait it out until other prices go up and then just put it up to the same thing as well, which is what they do all the time in any market because they know they all have that same power divide over you. Dargesh again in the chat. There isn't really competition for internet though. They are a few major internet companies, and their reach doesn't overlap much at all. Like it's a false competition of markets, and they all as well.
I used it. It's not false. I used it. I did it.
No, but you're still giving over a large amount of money to a corporation. Just because it's marginally less right now doesn't mean that you're not like the overall mechanism is still taking place. It's the same with me, right? Like I shop at cheaper supermarkets because I like paying less for my food than the overmarketed like Waitrose is more expensive. Do you have Waitrose in the US?
No.
Do you have
Not
Lidl in the US?
Yes, Lidl. We have them now.
Fantastic. It's like the budget European shop in the UK.
Yes.
But
my wife, who is German, says it's completely different here than it is in Europe, though. So don't go by that. No. Aldi's.
Well, if you ever, we have got Aldi as well, another German one. So like they are in Europe, in the UK, they're like the budget option. They're not. Waitrose would be like a proper upper middle class. I mean, I know class is a bit different in America, but like it's a proper like high. They have more expensive food at Waitrose.
Yes.
I shop at Lidl. I don't have the money to do a week. I'd be paying a lot more if I did my weekly shop at Waitrose. However, Lidl, whilst they are better, they are also aware of their position on the economy, And so they know that as they rise their prices, people who shop at them don't have a choice but to accept this rise in price, because they are the cheapest current option on the market. And so because they are still one of the major corporations, they can rise their price knowing that people still have to use it and can get away with it, because the other choice is spending more money elsewhere or not eating. So in the same way, whilst, yeah, you've got a better deal and that's great, the deal is still one that sees you fork over a lot of money every month, which is going to add up over a year because it has to, and leaves you, when in a year's time we say, yeah, we're going to renew this contract now, we're going to put the prices up some more, like, you have to either find a better price somewhere else, which might not exist, or accept the cost, or have no internet, which, like, is not it's not the way. It's not good.
The companies that are charging me the $62 a month for internet is going to raise their price eventually. And the idea is that that company wants to make more money.
Yeah.
Also, inflation from the government printing more money is going to drive the cost of everything up. Groceries, internet, gas. This is all from government actions.
But that's not the government. Like, the corporation chose to raise the price. Like, in theory, they could keep the price the same and just say, hey, maybe we're going to not take $1 billion in revenue this year. Maybe we'll take a bit less. In profit, sorry. Maybe we're going to, eat the cost and ride it out. But they never do. Dargesh again.
How far do you take that? How far do you take that particular line of thought? Do you take it until they go out of business?
Well, they wouldn't go, like, again, if it was if the system I advocate for, it wouldn't be coordinated on profit, so we wouldn't have that issue. But there is something to be said about, sorry, I realize that this actually goes above where our heads are. I have to hide behind it. Dargesh says, the reason that none of the major companies have really upgraded their system in decades, fiber optic internet is amazingly fast. There's no incentive for them to upgrade their systems. Another thing, right? Like, they don't want to do things until they have to, so they don't do it.
Yes.
But on what you've just said there, like, the corporations just chasing profit forever isn't sustainable, because you can't do it. On a planet with finite resources, as we're finding out in our climate, for instance, we can't just profit forever, because eventually you're going to run out. You're going to stop.
I'm personally going to chase profit until I die.
No, but, like, I mean, it's different for us because, like, we're not massive corporations with massive control over our economies. But just mathematically, you can't, like, if someone's profiting, someone's losing out. And eventually, when you lose out, like, when other people lose out, people don't have the actual means to be able to participate. And we're also, like, for as much as we're chasing profit, like, we're also just people, like, who have to pay for things to survive. Like, we don't own, we don't have a stake in like, food industry and health industry and transport industry. So we have to pay to. No, but but realistically, we can't just go and buy stocks in Pfizer. We can't go and buy stocks in Walmart, right? So we're not.
Yes, you can.
But tangibly, we don't have the money to do it on a meaningful level.
Right now, you're a student, right?
Yeah.
So right now, you don't have the funds to do it. You're in a hard part of life. I have stock that I've purchased, and it's not hard to do anymore, especially with the advent of technology. This has become much more easy.
Sure, I could download. Yeah, sure, I could download an app on my phone and see the stock market right now, right? But could I? How much money would I need to have to actually influence the pricing of essentials for me to actually, have an easier time, right? Like, we're not.
No, I think my first one was $20. They have microtransactions where you're not buying a whole stock; you're buying a piece of a stock.
I'm sure you could. Yeah, I'm sure you can, like, fragment it and such, right? Of course, but that's still not enough to actually influence. Like, no matter how many of those, like, unless you are a billionaire, there's no way that's going to actually lower the cost of the things you actually need in your life, like, tangibly to live, right? Like, I can't, even if I bought, like, 1,000 stocks in Lidl, the cost of the milk and bread and whatever else I buy from the shop is still more than it was last year and the year before and the year before.
Right now it is, but when your stock matures and you're making a lot more money from it, you have more resources, so it doesn't impact you as much.
But even that, like how many stocks would need to mature for me realistically to actually make
Well,
anything from it? Like
hopefully, right around retirement, it all kind of washes out. As an old guy, I got to tell you, I'm counting on that.
Well, I mean, even that, I mean, retirement days are going up, right? But like, let's say I'm 27 now. Let's say I retire in 50 years' time, right? Like, that's 50 years of what, just waiting for the stock market to play out for me. Like, that isn't feasible. Like, that's not. And bear in mind, during all that time, I'm still also putting money into having to afford these necessities. Like, it's not
absolutely
this
struggling.
isn't something which. No, exactly. That's not. This isn't a good way of organizing things. Like why we wouldn't even need to have this struggle if we address the fact that said corporations just hoard all this stuff anyway, right? Like it's and on top of that all, it's not even as though this is a stable way to do things, because there's nothing to say that there's not a market crash as we saw in 2008, and then all of a sudden all this stuff we've been investing in is just worthless anyway. Like it's just bad stock. So there's no. I don't think reliance on this as a means to, do things, because and it's unnecessary too. It's not a healthy or happy way for us to have to live our lives. We could, instead of chasing the American dream and having a fortune, or whatever, we could just invest in our way of life, like just as an inherent thing. Have our communities be in control and democratically run the things we have, rather than it being offsourced.
I love the idea of investing.
And it's not. Yeah, but investing, like, not just as like a financial transaction, but like an actual thing that exists to, as like in society, an actual practice that we do as workers interested in the things we have influence over, and not just as some like spectator participating because we have to buy milk every day at Lidl to survive. Like it's not good enough.
So as a college student, eventually you're going to have a much higher earning potential than I did. I hated school. I never went to college. I did one day. I didn't like that either. I joined the Navy. I got out of the Navy. I did a lot of other odd jobs. I didn't make a lot of money. I survived. It's part of what we do as human beings. We try to do the best we can and survive. So I've been homeless. It sucked. I didn't like that, so I went out and got a job real quick. That was my motivation to get a job. And once I got the job, I realized I can get a better job. And eventually I got the job where I'm at now. I'm not making as much money as before, but it is kind of what we do as human beings. We have to survive. And if we take away the motivation to better ourselves, then we're taking away the ability to go forward.
No one's taken away the motivation to better yourself, and that's not been taken away. What's been taken away is, or what would be taken away, is the unfair system of organization, which makes it harder to survive and makes it unfair for a lot of people. We wouldn't need to have people going homeless and having to scrabble around looking for jobs if we had a fairer and more functioning economy. And whilst I'm very glad you were able to get through, various hardships you had in your life, firstly, it shouldn't have had to happen in the first place. Like, you could still work hard.
I made some very bad choices. It had to happen.
Yeah, but like, even if no matter what bad choices you made, like, you still shouldn't have had to be homeless and all the other stuff, right? Like,
absolutely, I did. I made some very bad choices that led me to that point in my life. I made choices that detracted from my life to that point.
No, but like, I mean, unless you purposely blew up your house or something, like, I don't see what choice makes one deserve to be homeless. Like, everyone should be able to have. I
don't want to get into my personal choices, but as myself, I can tell you I got what I deserved. Okay? I did. Okay, well, and part of growing is realizing your mistakes of the past and moving forward. And that's what I did. And that's why I'm in this lower to medium income house. It's just where I ended up. Will I ever retire? Probably not. Because I really like my job, and the idea that retirement is something that you should go after. If that's what you want, go after it. But if you don't, then don't go after it.
Well, yeah, I get wanting to continue working. I get that everyone's got a different age that they sort of feel that the body's not on a set path. Yeah, everyone's got their own thing. But equally, like, it is still a lot of work. I mean, a truck driver, right? That's a hard job. That's a job that is very demanding, I would say, right?
Nah, I baled hay before. Trucking's easy.
Well, it's still, you're driving a big truck around, like it's a big responsibility. I'd say. I think
It
it's
is
quite
a
important.
very big responsibility.
Exactly. And so, you said that you're a little bit older than me, and again, this isn't to, when I say these negative things, they aren't like to be mean spirited, but you said that you might not ever retire, but like in 10, 20, 30 years time, that might feel you might feel differently. But
Oh yeah.
if you're still having to sell your labor in this market to be able to afford anything, like that isn't a healthy place to be, because at that point, like it's going to be very different. You might feel quite differently about the hours and the physical demand of actually driving a big truck around for so long when you're older than you are now, and knowing as well that if you don't do that, you're gonna have to find something that also pays the bills. Otherwise, you're gonna lose all the stuff that you've got. Like that isn't a healthy way of doing things. And critically, it doesn't have to be. Like you could still work hard and better yourself and be an active member of society, but just not have to have all the sort of, you must sell your labor to some corporation, otherwise you're not going to be able to afford a house, food, bills, etc. Like it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that's the sort of point that I'm trying to.
I agree with you, but I have to look forward enough. Whoops.
Oh no.
Maybe we should start thinking about wrapping this up. My gimbal just died.
I was wondering, I was on like a mounted stand, and I was thinking like,
we are not having a earthquake here in Georgia.
It's like someone picked up the house and was sort of just doing this with it.
Yeah, this is the rig that I have downstairs. So I grabbed my phone and came down here for my other microphone.
Yeah, sure. But... I mean, in fairness, we've not even really touched on woke all that much. So perhaps we'll do a part two if we're sort of 2 hours now, as well. Perhaps if you're up for it, we'll do a part two and we'll have a chat about.
Absolutely, this has been very enjoyable.
Yeah, no, it's been nice. It's been an interesting conversation. I am definitely borrowing Star Mark though. So if I ever go into a film
first.
If I ever make a film and Star Mark are my sort of fictitious villainous corporation, I'll have to credit you, Joe. We'll have to there'll be a writing credit somewhere. But no, I'll let you get going. It's both. It's strangely actually. Normally I do these in the evening, so it's like the end of the day for me. It's like the whole day ahead now. So yeah, all the best, Joe. I'll wrap the stream here and take care. All. Thanks everyone for watching.
This was a lot. This was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, glad you enjoyed it. See you in a bit.